This is Pivot Out Loud, stories about education and life in a world turned sideways. I'm Lori Huff.
Nearly 5 months on, I have had abundant time to consider my priorities as a teacher. What I would tell a first-year teacher this fall is that my priorities were flipped all along. Strong classroom management, planning ahead for lessons, and frequent feedback are all well and good. But they are no substitute for the relationships you build with students and their families.
Kenton Shimozaki really captures the reality of first-year teaching, both before COVID and after. I love how honest he is about all of it, the way he initially imagines his perfect classroom, then realizes that best intentions often don't get off the ground. When COVID hits, he realizes what truly matters, building relationships with students and families. This is Pivot Out Loud, and I'm your host, Lori Huff.
There is a distinct narrative about the first year of teaching. It is notoriously difficult. It's known to be hard because novice teachers tend to have poor classroom management skills, some lack supportive mentorship structures, and many enter the teaching profession unprepared for the context and demands of their schools. So, when I stood at the front of the classroom last August, I fully embraced that my first year of teaching would be exacting and that the results would be imperfect. Those first few months, I focused on the small victories, like maintaining some semblance of order throughout my lessons. To improve my craft, I watched plenty of veteran educators, took ample observation notes, and tried to replicate their demeanor the next day in class. My priority was not on being an excellent educator, merely an above-average first-year teacher. Still, even first-year teachers have hopes and dreams. I imagined that maybe one day in my first year, I would have a perfect class. Every student would be on task and engaged in what we were learning about, with minds overflowing from thoughtful connections and profound questions. I envisioned a perfect week where I was ahead on lesson planning instead of hastily drafting the night before, and giving detailed feedback on student assignments every day. But as the fall progressed and the leaves lost their chlorophyll, I also shedded some of my loftier goals. By early March, in the last weeks of the before times, there were many teaching aspirations I held that had not quite materialized. My desire of sending a positive text to every student's family member had never occurred. My intention to design a more engaging reading intervention unit had never gotten off the ground. My hope of rebuilding the relationship with the student I sent out of class a half dozen times had never come to fruition. Even in the pre-COVID era, the demands of licensure coursework, lesson planning, and grading always pushed these other priorities lower on the to-do list to the point they remained unfulfilled. Then, on March 13th, I said farewell to my students. They packed up their Chromebooks, I cleaned out the snacks in my middle desk drawer, and we transitioned to remote learning for the rest of the year. Not only was I naive to believe that we would return in person after spring break, but I gave little thought to how my professional priorities would shift. Initially, it felt as though the year might as well have started over. I had to figure out how to run virtual office hours via Zoom, record engaging lessons at the kitchen table through Loom, and give feedback through the side panel private comments feature of Google Classroom. Adapting to the new technology platforms for remote learning was jarring to the point that I put off thinking about what the priority should be as a teacher, novice or veteran, in this novel situation. Now, however, nearly 5 months on, I have had abundant time to consider my priorities as a teacher. What I realize now, what I would tell a first-year teacher this fall, is that my priorities were flipped all along. Strong classroom management, planning ahead for lessons, and frequent feedback are all well and good, but they are no substitute for the relationships you build with students and their families. I wish I had sent those text messages home last September to build the connections with my students' families early. I wish I had spent that extra weekend creating more meaningful, more relevant lessons that bridge the academic content with my students' everyday lives. I wish I had figured out how to reach that one struggling seventh grader so that he could have been successful in the classroom before and engaged in remote learning later. I never thought I would be ending my first year remotely. The first year of teaching was bound to be challenging with a classroom full of 30 12-year-olds. Never mind asynchronous lessons all spring. I could not have imagined how drastically my priorities, my core beliefs about what it means to teach, would have shifted this far in 1 year. So, as I think ahead to the first year of starting online, I have reconsidered what the priorities of a teacher should be. Stay connected, keep engaging, be concerned.
I found out Kenton went back to teach in a fully remote classroom. A couple of months in, I asked how it was going.
We're still fully remote.
So get us up to speed. How's the new school year going?
It's certainly been a challenge. The uncertainty of not knowing whether we were going to be back in person, hybrid, or remote certainly delayed a lot of the planning coming into the fall. And there's still been a lot of uncertainty when it comes to reopening schools and having that return to learn conversation that's been going on here in Denver. I think that uncertainty has been the most challenging aspect of this year in the classroom. I think teachers are adapting well to being in a remote setting and trying to make the best of it. Students are as well. But yeah, I think it's just that constant uncertainty that's still making this year really challenging on a day-to-day basis.
Are there things that you did at the end of last year, since you're still fully remote? Are there things that you're now able to incorporate this year that it helped that you did them in the spring?
I will say that this fall feels completely different than it did in the spring. In the spring, when we closed schools in the middle of March, our school system decided to go with a completely asynchronous model. And so assignments were posted, students were essentially told, hop online, complete them by the end of the day. We'll give you some feedback and we'll put the grades in. And I think for both teachers and students, that was very difficult. And I think for many students, that was not a model of learning that was helping them be successful. And so this fall, we really have transitioned to a fully synchronous instruction. And so I'm on Zoom, multiple hours a day teaching classes. And I think on the best days, I think some of my lessons feel like we're back in the classroom and that kids are learning in the way that we did prior to COVID. And I think there are other days that things are really challenging still. You feel the barriers and the limitations of trying to teach a class full of eighth graders over Zoom.
Give me an example of one or two challenges. Is it, the kids not wanting to put their cameras on or heads down or not showing up?
I will say that attendance is certainly challenging for a small subset of students. I've actually been really impressed with how many students are choosing to come online every day and be engaged in class. I would say, though, that the Zoom limitations, there are so many fewer opportunities I have to be able to see if a student understands the lesson, to be able to make eye contact with a student and know that, oh, they missed that last point, I need to repeat that, or being able to have that one-on-one check-in with a student to pump them back up so that they'll re-engage for the last half of class. Those kinds of moments, those kinds of opportunities that teachers have to be able to connect with their students and to be able to address misconceptions in real time, I think it's a lot more limited on Zoom in terms of what you can do for students in those cases. I think I've developed some tricks I have to try and help students who I know who are struggling, but there's nothing that replaces that one-on-one private check-in with a student, either to motivate them or to, again, address something confusing that happened in class.
In your essay, you talked about 3 priorities that you had developed as a teacher through this craziness. And one was stay connected, keep engaged, and be concerned. Have you been able to focus on those in this new school year?
Definitely. And I think that keeping connected with students has been one of the most important things. Again, like when you're teaching in person, it's easy to have those conversations with a student before or after class, to be able to chat with them during recess or lunch, to be able to tutor them after school if they need extra help. And now, again, it's challenging in the sense that Zoom class is over and I'm sitting alone in an office and the kids are all gone. Like there's, kind of an abrupt end to class. Keeping connected with students has been something I've really tried to work on. I'll say that I've had the fortunate opportunity to be able to loop with my students. So that means that as they moved from 7th to 8th grade, I also moved with them. And so about half of my students are students that I also taught last year. And so I've really benefited this year in remote learning, being able to leverage those connections that I had with students from last year and to be able to feel like we have a existing relationship and connection that we can continue building this year in a remote setting.
In the essay, you also talked about wishing you had sent out those text messages last fall to families. Have you been able to do that this year?
I definitely have. I've made more of a priority this year to make sure that I'm communicating with families and making sure that they are in the loop of what's happening with their children's education. I think that this is something that remote learning and the pandemic have highlighted, that, family communication has always been something that teachers, including myself, should be prioritizing. And I think it's only now that we're not seeing the students every day that we realize how important families are and what important partners they are in the education of their children. And so I definitely have been trying to reach out to families more, not only to pass along information and important updates about what's happening as we weigh the pros and cons of returning to school, but also just checking in with them about what does their child need to be successful? What are the barriers that they might be experiencing in their remote learning environment at home? And like, how can I and their family members collaborate so that we can have their student be as successful as possible as we continue with this?
For many parents, I bet this is also the most that they've been connected to their kids, not just homework at the end of the day, but, even being in the kitchen and listening in while their kid is in a class. It is a really interesting time for everyone.
Yeah, certainly. And I think that potentially it's an opportunity for families to be able to see like what it is that their students are learning about in school. I'm sure that every parent, including my own, remembers asking the question, so what did you learn at school today? And the student says, I don't know, or I don't remember. So I think it's actually in some ways a wonderful opportunity for families to have a window into what goes on in their children's education and be able to ask them questions about what they learned and be able to kind of like hear little bits and pieces of our lessons.
So as a new teacher, what will you take away the most from this experience?
I think what I'm going to take away most from this experience is the idea that, learning is not just about having well-crafted lessons. It's not just about spending hours and hours putting together what you think is the most interesting or engaging lesson in the world. It really is those connections that you have with students and with their families that it's going to make or break their success in school. I think that, again, when we were in person, I think it was easy to say, well, the kids are here, I can just make my lesson and, the kids will, learn things along the way. And, if I don't have enough time to send that text to the family or schedule a time to meet with them, like push it off and, I'll get to it in a few weeks or so. But now, like, it's, just a lot more urgent and it's a lot more important that teachers are staying connected to their students and families. And I think that this is something that I hope all teachers bring back, including myself, when we go back inevitably in person, is that we're still keeping families in the loop about what's happening with their students' education and, really trying to build those connections with students. That way they see the value in what they're learning and they see that their teachers are people that care about them and are people that are, really rooting for their success. I know all teachers want the best for their students. And I think, just making sure that families are a part of it and that we are, really building those strong relationships with students is something that I'm going to take away going back into the classroom.
Well, Kenton Shimozaki, good luck with the rest of the school year. And thank you for talking with me this evening.
Thank you.
That was Kenton Shimozaki, a middle school teacher from Denver, talking about teaching during the pandemic. I'm Lori Huff, the editor of Ed Magazine and the host of Pivot Out Loud by the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Thank you for listening.